My friends and I had always been drawn to the idea of spending a weekend deep in the woods, away from the hustle and bustle of the city. So when we found a secluded spot that promised both adventure and tranquility, we knew we had to go. There were 5 of us: me, James, David, Daniel, and Zoe. We packed our gear, grabbed some snacks, and hit the road on a crisp Friday afternoon. The drive took longer than expected, winding through dense forests and narrow dirt roads. As the sun began to set, we found ourselves enveloped in the deepening shadows of the forest. The last stretch of the road seemed almost forgotten by time, overgrown and rugged, as if few had traveled this way before. But when we finally arrived at our destination, it felt worth it. The site was nestled by a serene lake, surrounded by towering pine trees that swayed gently in the breeze. The lake's surface reflected the fading light of the sunset, creating a perfect mirror image of the darkening sky. As we set up our tents and built a fire, the sense of isolation became more pronounced. There were no signs of other campers, no distant sounds of civilization, just the 5 of us, alone in the vast expanse of wilderness. We spent the evening sharing stories, roasting marshmallows, and laughing under the starry sky. The stars here were brighter than any we'd seen back in the city, twinkling like diamonds in the inky blackness above. As the night grew colder, we decided it was time to turn in. I crawled into my tent, zipped up my sleeping bag, and quickly drifted off to sleep, the sound of the crackling fire lulling me into a sense of security. But something woke me in the middle of the night. A noise, faint but distinct. It sounded like footsteps, soft and deliberate, crunching on the forest floor. I held my breath, listening. At first I thought it was just one of my friends taking a late-night bathroom break, but then I heard it again. Closer this time. "James? David?" I called out softly, hoping for a reassuring reply, but the only response was the rustling of leaves in the wind. My heart began to race. I peeked out of my tent, squinting into the darkness. The fire had died down, leaving only glowing embers, and the clearing was eerily quiet. Suddenly Zoe's voice broke the silence. "Did you guys hear that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I heard it too," David replied, unzipping his tent and stepping out. It sounded like someone walking around. We all gathered around the dying fire, trying to make sense of what we had heard. The forest around us seemed to close in, the trees casting long, sinister shadows in the moonlight. The air felt thick, as if it were charged with some unseen energy. "Maybe it was just an animal," Daniel suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. "Or maybe it was nothing," I added, trying to calm myself down. "We're probably just spooking ourselves out." Reluctantly, we returned to our tents, but sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake, staring at the roof of my tent, every sound amplified in the silence. My mind began to play tricks on me. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of a branch became a potential threat. The image of shadowy figures lurking just beyond the trees kept flashing in my mind. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted off again. When I woke up, the sun was already high in the sky, and our little clearing was bustling with the usual morning activities. The strange events of the night before seemed like a distant memory, almost as if they hadn't happened at all. We spent the day exploring the woods, swimming in the lake, and enjoying the freedom that came with being out in nature. The beauty of the place was undeniable. Sunlight filtering through the trees, the cool, refreshing water of the lake, the calls of distant birds echoing through the forest. It was easy to forget the unease of the previous night. But as the day turned to evening, that uneasy feeling returned, We decided to make the most of our last night in the woods, so we built an even bigger fire, cooked a hearty meal, and shared more stories. But this time, the stories weren't light-hearted or funny. They were ghost stories, tales of haunted woods and lost campers, things that, in retrospect, we probably shouldn't have talked about. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows that danced on the trees, making them seem alive. As we finished our stories, the wind picked up, howling through the trees like a warning. The forest, which had seemed so inviting during the day, now felt menacing, as if it were watching us. We tried to shake off the feeling, laughing it off as just nerves from too many scary stories. But deep down, we all felt it, the sense that something wasn't right. Even the sounds of the forest seemed different, less familiar, more foreboding. The once comforting rustle of leaves now felt like whispers, the creaking branches like footsteps. That night, I had trouble sleeping again. I kept thinking about the footsteps we'd heard, the way the forest seemed to close in on us. I was just starting to drift off when I heard it. A whisper, soft and urgent, right outside my tent. "Help me." I bolted upright, my heart pounding in my chest. Had I imagined it? I strained to listen, but the whisper came again, more desperate this time. "Please, help me." I scrambled out of my tent, flashlight in hand, and shone it around the clearing. The beam cut through the darkness, but I saw nothing, no one. I could hear the others stirring in their tents, awakened by the same voice. "Did you hear that?" Zoe asked, her voice trembling. "Yeah," I replied, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. It sounded like someone asking for help. "But there's no one out here," Daniel said, stepping out of his tent and looking around nervously. We huddled together, shining our flashlights into the surrounding woods. But there was nothing. Only the trees, swaying ominously in the wind. The air felt colder, as if the warmth of the fire had been sucked out of the night. Then, without warning, the fire flared up, bright and fierce, as if someone had thrown gasoline on it. We all jumped back, startled, as the flames shot up into the sky. And in that brief moment, we saw them, figures, barely visible in the firelight, standing at the edge of the trees, watching us. They were pale, ghostly figures, their faces twisted in pain and fear, and they were all staring right at us. We didn't wait to see what would happen next. We grabbed our things and ran, straight through the forest, not caring about the twisted roots or overgrown foliage. We just wanted to get as far away from that place as possible. As we ran, the forest seemed to close in around us. The trees, once familiar, now looked like dark sentinels, their branches reaching out like claws. Every sound seemed amplified, the crunch of leaves under our feet, the labored breaths of my friends, the pounding of my own heart. The whisper followed us, growing fainter as we ran, but never fully disappearing. When we finally reached the road, we didn't stop running until we were back at the car. We piled in, slamming the doors shut, and sped away, not daring to look back. It wasn't until we were miles away that we finally spoke, trying to make sense of what had happened. But the more we talked, the more we realized that there was no logical explanation. What we had seen, those figures, the whispers, was something beyond our understanding. We never went back to that forest. The place remained a mystery, one that we were all too happy to leave behind. But the memories of that last night, the terror we felt, and the ghostly figures that watched us from the trees would haunt us forever. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls through the trees, I can still hear that voice, whispering, pleading for help. But now, I know better than to answer.